are you, my holy sisters and brothers? That was Zalman Pollack singing Havdalah, making a blessing separating from the holiness of Shabbos and the rest of the week which follows. A good evening, a Shavua Tov, a good Vach, a good week to you. We're starting this week beautifully by learning some lovely Torah on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. All right, a new candle, a new wisdom candle takes light. Who is with us as we do some learning on a great Saturday night? It's great because we're learning together. Melissa in Great Neck, James in Indy, Nancy in North Carolina, Crystal in Canada, Carla in Georgia, Ann in Merced, California. Bill says shalom from rain-soaked Arkansas, hoping everyone's Shabbos was restorative and that Facebook behaves for poor beleaguered Sal. It seems to be working, Baruch Hashem. Thank you for taking note, Bill. Sharon in Lebanon, Carolyn in Raleigh. Sharon says, why don't you play the creator of the melody, Debbie Friedman? Right, she composed that melody that Zalman was singing. I gotta find a Debbie Friedman recording to play. Michael says, buenos dias, Michael. Mark in Oregon, Michael grunts in approval. Nava says, a good Shabbos, a Shabbos Tov from Missouri in the Ozarks. Nina says, great idea. He has permission to, right, Nina, there's a whole clearance issue. It's not like we can use any recordings. I have to clear these recordings. If I don't clear a recording, if it's not cleared for use, huge problem. Facebook will cut off the stream for copyright infringement. So we'll see about Debbie Friedman recordings. Good point, Nina. Sarah in Charlotte, Paige in Vermont, Edward in Juno Beach, Nava saying Shavua Tov from Missouri, Rochelle in Modesto, Muya says shalom, Cindy saying a chilly hello from Alaska. Welcome, Cindy. Great to have you with us. Over there on the YouTube side, nobody has checked in yet to greet. Okay, so we have a beautiful dedication tonight. I'm sure a lot of you remember, because you've been with us for a while, right? Our resident artist, we haven't been able to do so many projects together lately, but Wanda Peretz, who's just a fantastic artist, particularly of Jewish liturgical art, shall we say. And she is dedicating tonight's episode of AT Daily to Israel ben Mordechai and Isaac ben Yehuda Leib HaKohen. This is definitely in memory of. Who were Israel ben Mordechai and Yitzhak ben Yehuda Leib HaKohen? They were the two artists who painted the original incredible ceiling of the Gwizdek synagogue in Poland, one of hundreds of wooden synagogues with incredible, beautiful artwork on their roofs that were all burned in the Holocaust. This one happened to have been photographed before the Holocaust, and a couple of really interesting professors from northeastern United States, I can't remember their names, did this incredible project where, using the dyes and wood techniques and wood cutting techniques and building techniques, they recreated that entire roof, that long lost roof from that synagogue, because it was both black and white photographs of the roof and a little color study of one portion of it. And from that evidence, they were able to recreate the entire roof. It took them years, using their students as a kind of living history project. And then Wanda became, just a great fan and student of that project, and then sort of did a similar kind of thing where people in a synagogue community could participate, over several weeks, kind of like painting, kind of, they did a recreation of the rooftop in Poland, and then installed it on a synagogue here in Los Angeles. So Wanda is honoring the memory of these two wonderful, largely unknown artists who must have painted that wooden synagogue ceiling, I believe, in either the 1600s or the 1700s. And so we honor their memory tonight. May their memory always be for a blessing, and may the merit of our learning tonight be a credit to them in the world of souls. And Wanda, may you and Avi and Emma and all your beautiful family and loved ones be showered in blessings from heaven, and we all say Amen. Okay. As we get started on this learning, I don't know why, I had in mind to make a Saturday night l'chaim. So if you've got some beverage nearby, you can make a l'chaim with me. We can say a blessing, and honestly, this blessing is for everyone in the world that could use a little bit more simcha, a little bit more joy. We're going to be talking about the offering of rejoicing in our daf today. And so let's make a l'chaim. We'll say a blessing for more simcha, for more joy in the world. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam she'akol nihiyeh b'divaro. Amen. Delicious. Love that McAllen. All right. Where are we holding? This is Daf Ayin, page 70, in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud, the Laws of Passover. We are in chapter 6, and today we're going to be discussing the second Mishnah of chapter 6. Very interesting Mishnah. It appears to be a little bit of a departure from what was being discussed in the Mishnah in the first Mishnah of this chapter, right? So the first Mishnah of this chapter was that the slaughtering of the Passover lamb, which falls on a Saturday afternoon, of course, it overrides the normal restrictions of making normally we're not allowed to slaughter an animal on Shabbos, but because we're commanded to slaughter the Passover offering on the afternoon before Passover begins, so even if that falls on Shabbos, we do it. And then we discuss, well, what are the limitations on that law? Are we going to override all the laws that are associated with Shabbos with respect to matters that are related to bringing the Passover offering, etc.? That's what we've been discussing the last few days. Now we begin the second Mishnah. When does one bring a festival peace offering with the Paschal Lamb? The festival peace offering is not something that we have discussed before. We've been talking about the Paschal Lamb, that's the Passover offering, and we've been talking about the daily offerings, which are offered every day when the temple is standing. Recall the Passover offering, the Paschal Lamb, is only brought in Jerusalem when the temple is standing. So tragically, we haven't been able to bring this offering in 2,000 years. When the temple was standing, we also brought a daily offering, a daily communal offering on behalf of the Jewish people, one every morning, one every afternoon. On Shabbos, 2 additional animals were slaughtered, even though it was Shabbos, because that was the additional offering of Shabbos, the Musaf, which now is represented by the Musaf Amida, the additional prayer we say on Saturday morning. Now we're talking about this festival peace offering. This is the Chagigah. So the Chagigah is an offering that is brought on Chag, right? On festivals. So which festivals are we talking about? We're talking about the pilgrimage festivals. So when the temple was standing and the Jews lived in the ancient land of Israel, so for Passover, which obviously celebrates the Exodus from Egypt, on Shavuos, which celebrates the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai, and at Sukkot, which basically celebrates or commemorates that we dwelled in huts or booths or tents, however you want to look at it, when the children of Israel wandered in the desert for 40 years. And Sukkot is a fall holiday that follows 5 days after Yom Kippur. These are the pilgrimage festivals. And on the pilgrimage festivals, there's an additional offering, not brought by, the priests on behalf of everybody, but that the people themselves would bring. This is the festival peace offering. Now that's actually brought, as we'll be discussing on this daf, it's brought on the first day of the festival itself. In other words, on the Chag, right? Meaning the first day of Passover, or on Shavuos itself, or on the first day of Sukkot. But now we're going to be learning that there's actually an additional festival peace offering that was optional and could be slaughtered and eaten that night of Passover, but it could be slaughtered on the afternoon before Passover night, at the same time that the Paschal Lamb was offered. Why would the people bring this optional? It's called a festival peace offering, but that would normally imply that it's being slaughtered on the festival. This one is slaughtered before the festival. That's why it's optional, and it was not always brought, as we shall see. A special offering is brought on the 14th of Nissan, right? So Passover begins on the 15th, the night of the 15th of the Hebrew month of Nissan. On the afternoon of the 14th is when we slaughter the Paschal Lamb so that it will be ready for roasting and eating that night on the 15th. So a special offering is brought on the 14th of Nissan together with the Paschal Lamb when the Paschal Lamb comes on a weekday rather than on Shabbos. So if the afternoon preceding Passover night falls on Shabbos, then we don't do this additional Chagigah, this additional festival peace offering. So it's only brought when the Paschal Lamb is slaughtered on a weekday rather than on Shabbos, and when it comes in a state of ritual purity. Meaning, when do people in a state of ritual impurity, in a state of tuma, nevertheless bring the Passover offering? That's when the majority of the people of Israel are in a state of tuma. And that, normally when an individual or a small group of individuals are tameh, they're ritually impure, for example, because they went out and buried a dead body. So that would make them tameh by reason of touching a human corpse. So then they can't bring the Passover offering. And for that reason, God gave the Jewish people Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, which is a month later. That's for the people who were tameh. However, if the majority of the Jewish people, if more than half the Jewish people are tameh, if, for example, the Kohen Gadol or the Nasi, either the spiritual leader or the governing leader of the Jewish people died, and everybody went to, or at least everybody in the Jerusalem area went to the funeral, then they might all be in a state of tuma, and they're all tameh, they're all ritually impure, and in that case, they would still bring the Passover offering in its time. However, if they are all tameh, they will bring the Paschal Lamb, they will bring the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering, but they will not bring this additional festival offering. That's what the Mishna is telling us. Where am I? So when it is brought when the Paschal Lamb comes on a weekday, and when it comes in a state of tahara, of ritual purity, as opposed to when it is brought in a state of impurity, because most of the community is impure, and when many people are registered for the Paschal Lamb, so that each person will receive only a small portion from it. As we mentioned earlier, the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, right? You had to be already registered with a group of people that would share a particular lamb or a young goat, either one in its first year. But you couldn't just show up and join some group, right? You had to plan in advance that we are a group and we are the group that's going to eat this particular lamb. After it's slaughtered on the 14th of Nissan, its blood, a little bit of its blood is splattered on the altar in the temple, and then we're going to roast it whole, and our group is going to eat it. But really, you only have to have a very small amount for you to have fulfilled your obligation to be part of a group and eat the Pesach, eat the Paschal Lamb. Like a very small, like a bite, basically. So that's not much of a meal, right? So if you have a large group, they're all going to share one Paschal Lamb, but they want to have a dinner and a celebration. So for such a large group that each person is going to get such a tiny piece of the Paschal Lamb, then it would make sense to have this additional offering that they also slaughtered on the afternoon of the 14th, so that they could get some more meat on their plate. Okay. And by the way, good article in the Wall Street Journal today about how healthy a protein-rich diet can be, usually from meat. I'm not here to talk about the health merits of, plant-based diets, animal-based diets, but, meat is good for some people. Let's just say that. Okay. So where am I? So when these three conditions are met, the festival peace offering is eaten first, which is interesting. You would think that you would eat the more important Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, and then have this additional, festival peace offering so that you could kind of fill up and feel like you've eaten a good meal. But no, you eat that festival peace offering meat first, and then you have, maybe it's only a little bite, but then you have your piece of the Paschal Lamb. And we'll see why a little later. So when these three conditions are met, the festival peace offering is eaten first and the Paschal Lamb is eaten afterward. When, however, the Paschal Lamb comes on Shabbos, right? So it's slaughtered on Shabbos, or when few people are registered for it so that each person will receive a large portion, or when it is brought in a state of ritual impurity, meaning that the majority of the Jewish people in Jerusalem at that time are tameh, and they're bringing it anyway, that's okay. You can bring the Paschal Lamb, but then you don't bring this additional festival peace offering. In that case, one does not bring the festival peace offering with it. With regard to the extra offering itself, the festival peace offering would come from the flock. That means from the sheep or the goats. From the herd, which means it could be a cow, right? It could come from the cattle. And then it specifies from sheep or from goats, from male or from females, right? So that is as opposed to the Paschal Lamb, which could only be a sheep or a goat. It could only be male. It could only be in its first year. This additional offering doesn't have those restrictions on it. As the festival peace offering is not bound by the limitations governing the Paschal offering, which must be specifically a young male sheep or goat. And the festival peace offering is eaten for 2 days and 1 night like other peace offerings, as opposed to the Paschal Lamb, which you slaughter at the afternoon of the 14th, you roast it either that afternoon, or if it's Shabbos afternoon, you roast it that night, Saturday night. Then you make your Seder, you eat it, and anything that's left over, if anything that's left over, then by the next morning it needs to be burned. There's no leftovers. But a peace offering, you can eat it that night, you can eat it the next day, you can eat it the following night. And then on that third morning, you would have to burn anything else that is left. The Gemara, and that, by the way, as we stated in the Mishna just now, that is the halacha. That is the law, right? So that the way it was stated in the Mishnah, that is the law. There will be a minority opinion of Ben Tema, which the sages will explore in detail, but what we just read in the Mishnah is the halacha, the law. The Gemara enters. The Gemara questions why this halacha, why this law is recorded here. What did the Mishnah previously teach that made it relevant to teach this halacha with regard to a festival peace offering, despite the fact that it seems unconnected to the previous Mishnayot, to the previous Mishnahs that we've been studying? The Gemara answers, since it taught that carrying the Paschal Lamb through a public domain and bringing it from outside the Shabbos limit do not override Shabbos, right? So those are related matters to the Paschal Lamb. In other words, it is an obligation to slaughter the Paschal Lamb on the afternoon of the 14th of Nissan, and Passover begins that night on the 15th of the Hebrew month of Nissan. So, since we override Shabbos to slaughter it that afternoon, you might think that we also override Shabbos to carry it more than 4 cubits in the public domain, or to bring it from beyond 2,000 cubits, which is the Shabbos boundary, how far you're permitted to walk on Shabbos. But in fact, you could have brought it to the location where you're going to be slaughtering it on Friday, right, when it wasn't Shabbos. And since you could have done that, the law is, as we learned, this is a dispute between Akiva and Eliezer, and the law accords with Akiva that anything that could have been done before Shabbos must be done before Shabbos, and we don't override the restrictions of Shabbos in favor of that. So that's what we've been learning recently. Since we were learning that, since we just learned about carrying the Paschal Lamb and bringing it from outside the Shabbos boundary, that these don't override Shabbos, the Mishnah also taught, with regard to the law of the festival peace offering, that it does not override Shabbos, right? So we will bring this additional festival peace offering for large groups that aren't going to get enough of the Paschal Lamb for themselves, but we don't bring that additional offering if we would need to slaughter it on Shabbos, i.e. override the restrictions of Shabbos in order to bring that additional offering. And this is what the Mishnah is saying. When does one bring a festival peace offering with the Paschal Lamb? When it comes on a weekday, in a state of ritual purity, right? Meaning that the community is in a state of tahara, is pure, and when each person's portion is small. Rav Ashi said, learn from this, that the festival peace offering of the 14th of Nissan, which comes with the Paschal Lamb and is the subject of our Mishnah, as opposed to the festival peace offering that is brought on the first day of Passover and is called the festival peace offering of the 15th, which is an obligation. This one, which is brought on the 14th, is not an obligatory offering. It is optional, right? So festival peace offerings, when you make that pilgrimage to Jerusalem to be there for the festival, on the first day, when the temple is standing on the first day of Passover, you bring a Chagigah. On the first day of Shavuos, you bring a Chagigah. On the first day of Sukkot, you bring the Chagigah. This is not the obligatory Chagigah that you would slaughter and eat on the first day of the festival itself. This one is slaughtered before the festival has actually begun, like the Paschal Lamb, and it will only do it because the people who are eating the Paschal Lamb, there's too many of them registered to each Paschal Lamb or goat. So it's optional so that people get enough to eat when they have that dinner, but it's not necessary. It's definitely not obligatory. This is what Rav Ashi is saying. This is not an obligation, meaning there is no Torah obligation to bring this offering. For if it should enter your mind to say that it is an obligation, it should come even on Shabbos, and it should come even when each member of the group will receive a large portion of the Paschal Lamb, and it should come even if the majority of the people are in a state of tumah, in a state of ritual impurity. The Gemara asks, if there is no obligation to bring this offering, what is the reason that it nevertheless comes when each person's portion of the Paschal Lamb is small? If it's optional, why does it seem to say that, well, if their portions are small, then you must bring it? Is that like if they're small, then you're permitted to bring it? Or if those portions are small, you must bring it? The Gemara explains that the reason is, as was taught in a Baraisa, the festival peace offering that comes with the Paschal Lamb is eaten first. And the reason for this is so that the Paschal Lamb will be eaten when one is already satiated. The Paschal Lamb should not be eaten in a needy manner, but rather in joy, and when one is already filled to satisfaction. Now, isn't that interesting? This is one of those cases, right, where you can apply that old saying, the saying of Nina and Sal as screenwriters, that 1 + 1 = 1/2. If you're eating a portion of the Paschal Lamb because you're fulfilling your obligation to remember the Exodus, the departure from slavery in Egypt of the Jewish people, and you're eating your portion of the Paschal Lamb because you're hungry and it's good and you just want to, satisfy your hunger, then these two reasons tend to cancel each other out. 1 + 1 = 1/2. Better, You should feel like you've eaten a good meal. Okay, I'm not hungry anymore. And now I'm eating my piece of the Paschal Lamb only for the spiritually mandated reason that I should remember what God did for me personally, because every Jew should see themselves as being there at the time that God redeemed us from slavery in Egypt. We don't want to be thinking both, this serves a spiritual purpose and I'm satisfying my yawing hunger, right? It's one or the other. And that's why this Chagigah of Erev Pesach, this festival peace offering from the day before Pesach, we have that option to bring it on the days when it's possible. You can't always bring it, right? If the people are generally in a state of tumah, or if it's Shabbos, okay, then it doesn't apply. But if you feel like you're going to be eating it just to get full, and you have this option, better, you should eat the Chagigah first and then eat the Korban Pesach. Okay. Now, then the sages are going to spend quite a bit of time discussing the minority opinion of a sage named Ben Tema. The law doesn't follow Ben Tema. Ben Tema says basically that all of the laws which apply to the Paschal Lamb also apply to this optional additional Chagigah, this festival peace offering that's slaughtered on Erev Pesach, on the afternoon before Passover begins. That's a minority view. The sages don't agree with it, but they just kind of explore what it means according to Ben Tema and how does he derive his opinion that all these various laws, the way that you slaughter it, the kind of animal that qualifies, the way that you bring it, etc., all of them have to match as if it's the same kind of animal as qualifies to be the Korban Pesach. So if you're interested in that discussion, definitely read here, page 70 on the A side in Tractate Pesachim. We are going to skip forward, and we're going to discuss, and it's going to be a little bit of a short show tonight, I think. But now we're going to discuss this fellow, Yehuda ben Dorsai. Hold on a second. Let me make sure I got him. Yeah, Yehuda ben Dorsai and his son. Okay, so Yehuda ben Dorsai and Dorsai his son. So presumably his father had died before his son was born, and that's why he named his son after his father. So it's Yehuda ben Dorsai and his son Dorsai. And that's because generally speaking, Jews don't name their children after living direct relatives. Okay, and Yehuda ben Dorsai and his son Dorsai are going to take issue with the law of this additional Chagigah, this extra Chagigah that one can bring and slaughter also on the afternoon before Passover. He doesn't like the way the sages ruled on this, and so much so that he separates himself from the community. Let's read about this. It was taught in a baraisa. Yehuda ben Dorsai separated himself from the other rabbis. He and Dorsai, his son, went and settled in the south, meaning far enough away from Jerusalem so that he would not be obligated to bring the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, seeing that he was at a great distance from Jerusalem, right? If it was impossible for you to get to Jerusalem, so then you didn't have to go. Not everybody made it to Jerusalem, but much of the Jewish world did. He did this because he disagreed with the rabbis with regard to the Chagigah of the 14th of Nissan, the festival peace offering of the 14th of Nissan, which in their view does not override Shabbos, right? We slaughter the Paschal Lamb. If the 14th of Nissan falls on Shabbos, we slaughter it that afternoon, even though it's Shabbos. But we don't slaughter this Chagigah, this additional Chagigah for Erev Pesach, because it's Shabbos. Yehuda ben Dorsai thought that we should slaughter it, that its law should be exactly the same as the Korban Pesach, and if we're slaughtering the Passover lamb, we should also slaughter this additional peace offering, which enables people, right, who are in large groups, that they should, get full on the Chagigah, and then really take a bite of the Korban Pesach just for that spiritual value of the bite and not to satisfy their hunger. Says Yehuda ben Dorsai, if Elijah, right, Elijah the prophet, will come and say to the Jewish people, for what reason did you not sacrifice the Chagigah on Shabbos? For what reason did you not sacrifice this festival peace offering of the 14th of Nissan on Shabbos? What will they say to him? Meaning, right, when do the sages cite Elijah, that Elijah will come? When there's a question that they can't resolve and they're going to leave it unresolved, and they say, when Elijah comes, he'll tell us what the answer is. Elijah is often cited in this regard because he is a prophet who didn't die. Elijah ascended to heaven, and because he didn't die, sometimes he comes back. Sometimes the sages encounter Elijah in the marketplace and they answer, and Elijah will answer some questions that are put to him. Elijah becomes this kind of emissary, messenger between heaven and the people on earth. But it's not like he comes whenever we call, right? And we have, of course, the tradition that when the Messiah comes, Elijah will come at least one day before and tell us that the Messiah is coming. And that's why every Passover, we pour a cup of wine for Elijah, and at a certain point in the Seder, the Passover Seder, we open the front door of the house, hoping that Elijah will be there to come and drink his glass and announce that the day of the Lord is coming. So says Yehuda ben Dorsai, if Elijah will come, and he asks, why aren't the people sacrificing this additional offering just because it's Shabbos, but it should have the same law as the Korban Pesach? What will the people say to him? And says Yehuda ben Dorsai, I am astounded at the two most eminent scholars of the generation, Shemaya and Avtalyon, who are great sages and great expositors of the Torah, and yet they did not tell the Jewish people that even the festival peace offering of the 14th overrides Shabbos. Right? So he disagrees with the rabbis, and he particularly disagrees with the leaders of the generation in which he lived. Now, we've recently heard these names, Shemaya and Avtalyon. They were the fourth pair of rabbis in that chain of transmission that began with God at Sinai, gave the Torah to Moses. Moses passed on the oral tradition to Joshua to the elders to the judges to the prophets, to the elders to the prophets to the judges to the men of the great assembly. Then there were these pairs of rabbis. The fourth one was Shemaya and Avtalyon. The fifth pair was Hillel and Shammai. So we recently learned about how devoted Hillel was to his teachers, Shemaya and Avtalyon. And Hillel sort of rebuked the people for not listening to their great leaders, Shemaya and Avtalyon. Now this Yehuda ben Dorsai is angry at Shemaya and Avtalyon for not transmitting this important law, which in his opinion should be held like this. He disagrees with the ruling of the other rabbis, and he thinks that the people are going to suffer for it because they've been led astray. And Shemaya and Avtalyon got the law wrong and led the people astray. So before we continue to see what happens to Yehuda ben Dorsai as he moves away from the Jewish people as a public, very public rebuke of Shemaya and Avtalyon, let's just get a little more background on Shemaya and Avtalyon. So Shemaya and Avtalyon were the fourth pair of rabbinic sages listed in Pirkei Avos, the chapters of the fathers, who served as leaders of the Sanhedrin during the reign of Herod the Great in the 1st century before the Common Era, and they played a role in establishing the Mishna, right? Establishing the Mishna. According to tradition, they were converts. Who knew? According to the tradition, they were converts or descendants of converts whose lineage was traced to Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. Right? That's Sennacherib who defeated the northern kingdom and scattered the tribes of Israel. And now his descendants are these great sages in Israel. You never know. Only a small number of halachos, of laws, appear in the Talmud quoted in their names, but their ethical teachings include important statements. So I thought I would read this from Pirkei Avos. I've mentioned this before. There's a beautiful Pirkei Avos with the commentary of the Maharal, Rabbi Yehuda Low of Prague. So they're quite short, and they're great and important teachings. Shemaya and Avtalyon received the Torah from them, from the previous sages listed here, right? The previous pair were Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shattach. Okay, so Shemaya and Avtalyon received the oral tradition from their teachers. Shemaya taught, right? So Shemaya doesn't have that many teachings, but in Pirkei Avos, which is like the greatest hits of Jewish wisdom of the sages, so Shemaya says, love work. Now he's speaking to Torah scholars, and what he's saying to them is, don't be so dependent on gifts of the community that you then have to go and curry favor with some mentor of yours, and you're not going to be free to give Torah rulings that are true, but you might be tempted to just placate, your rich sponsors. Love work. Despise holding office. Don't put yourself in a governing position where your rulings won't be pure. Just what does the Torah say? What does God want from the Jewish people? But then you're going to be concerned with all kinds of politics and other kinds of nonsense. And 3, do not curry favor with the government, right? So he's saying, make sure you have your own gainful employment. Don't try to be a politician who holds office, and don't try to curry favor with politicians who are in office. Now, this is advice for Torah scholars, but it's pretty good for the rest of us too. Make sure you have gainful employment. Avoid authority, right? People who pursue authority and power rarely deserve it. The ones who, really should be in power are the ones who don't really want the job, but they're called on to serve because everyone recognizes that they're able leaders. That's who should be in authority. And don't be currying favor with the powerful. It's a waste of time. The only powerful being that we need to address our petitions to is the Holy One, blessed be He. Obviously, we have to work with the government, but don't become overly familiar. The way it's translated here is, don't become overly familiar with those in power. And Avtalyon says, he specifically says scholars, right? So he's really addressing scholars. Be cautious with your words, for you may incur the penalty of exile and be banished to a place of evil waters. The disciples who follow you there may drink and die, and consequently, the name of heaven will be desecrated. Meaning that if you get it wrong, if you're not careful with how you teach Torah, you may lead others into error. You have to be absolutely as careful as you possibly can be when you seek to transmit teachings of Torah to others. Right? And you may exile yourself to a place that is Torah-less by the mistake in your words. So it's interesting that the one who's now attacking Shemaya and Avtalyon for getting this teaching wrong, and then separated himself from the community, is this guy Yehuda ben Dorsai, and he took his son Dorsai with him. Right? So at least in terms of his son, he removed his son from the community. And it was not good for them because he thought he knew better than the majority of the sages who had already ruled on this matter. Now, what is his reason? What Rav said, what is Ben Dorsai's reason? As it is written, and you shall slaughter the Paschal offering to the Lord your God from the flock and from the herd, in the place which the Lord shall choose to rest his name there. That's Deuteronomy 16:2. So the question must be asked, does the Paschal offering come from the herd as well as the flock? No, we know from Exodus 12:5 that the Paschal offering can only come from the flock, meaning from sheep and goats. It must be a young, in its first year, male sheep, meaning a lamb, or a kid of the goats. It can't be a calf. It can't be from the cattle. So what does it mean in Deuteronomy when it says, you shall bring the Paschal offering to the Lord your God from the flock and from the herd? So rather, the verse should be understood as follows. Flock, this is referring to the Korban Pesach, to the Paschal offering. Herd, this is referring to the festival peace offering that is brought along with it. And the merciful one says, and you shall slaughter the Paschal offering, thus teaching that two offerings are sacrificed together. And from here, Ben Dorsai derived that the festival peace offering of the 14th is like the Paschal offering in every way, and so it too overrides Shabbos. Rav Ashi said, do we need to arise and explain the reason of those who separated themselves from the other rabbis? Right? See, Ben Dorsai, we just spent like a whole page. I mean, we skipped it in our discussion tonight, but we spent a whole long page discussing the minority opinion, which the rabbis don't follow, but we did an extensive discussion of the minority opinion of Ben Tema, saying basically the same thing, that the same laws that apply to the Korban Pesach apply to this additional Chagigah of the afternoon of the 14th. But says Rav Ashi, this Ben Dorsai, he left the community. He made this public spectacle of moving away with his son and saying Shemaya and Avtalyon are not fit to be Torah authorities, and we don't want to have anything to do with them, and so we're not even going to bring the Korban Pesach at all. That person, says Rav Ashi, we don't care what his reasoning is and the basis of his minority opinion. We don't need to study that. Ben Dorsai and his son broke away from all the other sages of the Jewish people, and we need not occupy ourselves with the opinions of such people. Rather, the verse comes to explain the opinion of Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman also had a doubt on this question. It says we bring the Paschal offering from the flock and the herd. What does that mean? So we'll study Rav Nachman's view of that. So Rav Nachman said that Rabba bar Avu said, from where is it derived that a leftover Paschal offering is sacrificed as a peace offering? Now, first of all, what is a leftover Paschal offering? This is not the leftovers after everybody has eaten their portion on Passover night and then it has to be burned the next morning. That's not what a leftover Paschal offering is. A leftover Paschal offering is an animal that had been consecrated as a Paschal offering, but was subsequently lost and later found after a different animal had already been sacrificed in its place, right? Once you consecrate an animal as an offering, so it has to be offered, right? You can't then change your mind and send it back into the flock. When you consecrate something, you've made a gift to God, basically, and you can't take it back. And since you've made that consecration, you've said, I'm going to bring this animal as an offering. If the animal is lost, well, then you have to replace it because you still owe an animal to the Lord, as it were. So then it's lost, you replace it, you bring this other animal as an offering, and then you find the original. Now you might think, well, since I took a second animal to replace the first, so I gave God what I promised to give, that first one consecrated animal. Now I find that other one that was lost, so maybe I could just return it to my flock. No, because that animal was consecrated as a gift to the Lord. So the fact that you lost it, that's not God's fault, that's your fault. So now you have to bring both the replacement, which you already brought, and the first animal. But you can't bring it as the Paschal Lamb because you already slaughtered your Paschal Lamb. So this additional one that you consecrated to be the Paschal Lamb still needs to be offered, but not as the Paschal Lamb. What is it offered as? A Chagigah. A leftover Paschal offering is an animal that had been consecrated as Paschal offering but was subsequently lost and later found after a different animal had already been sacrificed in its place. Alternatively, if one set aside and consecrated money for the purchase of a Paschal lamb, and then the price of livestock dropped so that there was money left over, and the purchase was made, then that extra money has the status of a leftover Paschal Lamb, right? You consecrated money to buy your Korban Pesach, to buy your Paschal Lamb. Then lambs became much cheaper. There was a surplus of them that year, so you were able to buy it for much less than the amount of money you had consecrated. So you still, consecrated that money. You still have to give that money as a gift, for a divine purpose, as it were. And so that money has the status of this leftover Paschal Lamb. And again, you would use it to purchase a festival offering, right, for joy. It's you're bringing it for rejoicing. As it is stated, and you shall slaughter the Paschal offering to the Lord your God from the flock and from the herd. Does the Paschal offering come from the herd? Doesn't it come from only the sheep and from the goats? Rather, the verse comes to teach that a leftover Paschal offering shall be brought as something that comes from the flock and from the herd. Since that leftover animal, or in this case, the leftover money, that you already used some of it to purchase your obligation, which was the Paschal Lamb, and now there's leftover. The leftover money, that does not have to be a lamb or a goat. You could use that money to buy a calf if you wish. And the Gemara asks about the crux of the matter, and according to the opinion of the rabbis, what is the reason that the festival peace offering does not override Shabbos? It is certainly a communal offering, and communal offerings override Shabbos, right? Offerings that are an obligation on the whole community as opposed to optional offerings for an individual, they do override Shabbos, like the daily offering or the Musaf offering or the Paschal Lamb. However, with respect to this festival offering, the festival peace offering does not override Shabbos. And now we're not talking about the Chagigah of the 14th. We have a note here that explains that. Now we're talking about the Chagigah of the 15th, right? The Chagigah of the 14th is optional, and for sure it doesn't override Shabbos. But now we're learning that the Chagigah of the 15th, meaning the Chagigah on the first day of Passover, that everyone is obligated to bring whenever you go on this festival, pilgrimage festivals to Jerusalem, right? So on the first day of Passover, or on the first day of Sukkot, or on the first day of Shavuos, Shavuos is only one day in Israel, so then you have to bring this Chagigah, the festival peace offering, the peace offering of rejoicing, right? Because you're rejoicing in the festival. But if the festival falls on Shabbos, even the obligatory offering of the 15th, we don't bring on Shabbos. Why? Explains Rambam, a festival peace offering does not override Shabbos because it can be sacrificed the entire 7 days of the festival. You only need one Chagigah, festival peace offering for rejoicing in the festival. You only need one per festival. So since Passover is 7 days long, obviously, you don't have to bring it on Shabbos. It's still going to be Passover the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, and you can bring the Chagigah when it's not Shabbos. Same for Sukkot. Shavuos, if it lands on Shabbos, and Shavuos in Israel is only 1 day long. In the diaspora, it's 2 days, okay, but in Israel, it's only 1 day. If that day falls on Shabbos, so don't you then doesn't it then override Shabbos? And the answer is no. The law is you can actually, because of a pilgrimage festival, you don't go there for 1 day. So even Shavuos, which is only 1 day long, you can bring the Chagigah the next day. In fact, you can do it for the next 6 days after the festival of Shavuos. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let me check your comments and questions. Shoshana Timon says, we don't eat lamb on Pesach. There is no temple. Exactly. We mentioned that a bunch of times. The lamb that we eat on Passover night is only when the temple is standing. Since the temple was destroyed, we don't eat the lamb. We remember the Korban Pesach. We remember the lamb that we ate when the temple was standing. How do we remember it? With the Hillel sandwich, which is the matzah and the bitter herbs together in one bite, and that is a reminder of when we were able to eat the Korban Pesach itself. Sharon, an artist, Nina Talbot, did something similar to the Gevizhit synagogue in the shul built in Dinau, where my grandmother is from, home of the famous Dinauer Hasidic sage Rabbi Tzvi Elimelech. Cool. So you're saying it was a recreation of that roof. I heard that this was done in Manhattan also. I think some synagogue in Manhattan did a similar project. And I'm glad, I'm not familiar with Nina Talbot, but great. The more people do this, the better. Bill Eldridge. Ooh, I like this Rabbi Avtalyon. Then again, I'm an easy sell for any religious leader who tells their people to hold power with skepticism. Amen. And Lynn says, were there independent meat markets in Jerusalem to feed the pilgrims regular meals that were not part of the formal temple offerings? I mean, I got to imagine, I don't know for sure, but it seems to me that since we know that the Meiser Sheni, right, the second tithe, was, right, the purpose of it in most years, right, 4 out of the 7 years of the Shemitah cycle, you were supposed to, use it. You could sell the produce from your farm. The second, right, the first 2% goes to the priest. The next 10% goes to the Levite. And then the next 10%, you can sell it, turn that into money, which you bind up in your hand, and it's to pay your expenses so that you can rejoice during the pilgrimage festival in Jerusalem, right? So all these people had money to spend. It was to finance their trip to go up to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festivals. So there must have been a big industry of feeding the people, housing the people, giving the people souvenirs, etc., during these pilgrimage festivals, but particularly so that they could enjoy the festival, right? Which rejoicing means, and the Talmud teaches elsewhere, there is no rejoicing without meat, right? So yeah, I'm sure there was a market for these people to eat meat during their days of rejoicing in Jerusalem. I'm sure there was wine. I'm sure there was food. I'm sure there was places to sleep, etc. It was definitely an industry of hosting all those pilgrims. We don't have that so much anymore. But, certainly Jerusalem enjoys a thriving, at least, well, not when there's COVID, but normally a thriving tourist industry of people from around the world who want to visit and experience the holiness of Jerusalem. And in that way, kind of reminds us of those pilgrimage festivals. And Sharon mentions that synagogue in New York City, I guess where Nina Talbot did a recreation of one of those painted ceilings of the wooden synagogues of Poland at the Eldridge Street Synagogue in New York City. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us this evening. You should have a good vach, that's Yiddish, a Shavua Tov, that's Hebrew, a good week. That's English. That's what we wish each other on Saturday nights as we begin a new week. And this is the best way to begin a new week with some beautiful teachings from our Savior.